Looking for fascinating conversations with industry thought leaders? Want to get the inside scoop from local legends? Interested in the stories behind the stories from celebrated visionaries? This is your home for the best our university has to offer. Welcome to We Are IU.
In the world of high-stakes research, we often talk about breakthroughs in terms of molecules or machines, but some of the most profound barriers to human progress aren't physical, they're social. Nearly every family in Indiana and across the globe is touched by mental illness, yet a silent wall of stigma often stands between suffering and support. For decades, one scholar has been leading the charge to tear down that wall. Today on the We Are IU podcast, we sit down with Dr. Bernice Pesco-Salido. She's an IU Distinguished Professor, a pioneer in socio-medical sciences, and the visionary behind the Ursay Institute, who was recently honored as part of the IU Bloomington for the Glory initiative. Her work doesn't just analyze society, it retools it for the better. Long before mental health became a national headline, Bernice was studying how stigma forms, how it spreads, and how it can be dismantled. Her research is not just changing conversations, it's changing systems, policies, and lives. Welcome to the podcast, Bernice.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's really great to be here.
The pleasure is all ours. Now, you've spent decades researching mental health stigma. When you use the word stigma, what does that actually mean in everyday life? I think we have some sense broadly, but what do you mean by it?
Well, usually when we talk about stigma, we're talking about a mark. It's a societally constructed mark of difference. And the problem with stigma is that that mark then denotes somebody who should be devalued. And the result of being devalued in society means that there's prejudice you encounter and discrimination regarding opportunities. Even length of life is affected by whether or not you have a stigmatized condition.
Mm-hmm. And that comes in just so many different forms, I'm sure.
It does. I'm afraid it does. There are many things at this point in our society that are different that we really don't want to embrace. But, the human species is incredibly varied. And so the idea that we should all fit one mode really doesn't work for us.
That's fair. No, that's fair. And, particularly related to mental health stigmas, I was curious, why do you think there's such persistence there, even as, broad awareness around the variety of mental health conditions has just increased over the years?
I think there's still a fear of contagion and there's a fear of violence. And, mental illness is not contagious. There's just no evidence to suggest that. In fact, even the genetic evidence is pretty weak. But it's such a mysterious illness that I think when we don't understand something, then we mark it as different. And so we have not made the progress in the science of mental health, mental illness, or even addiction that we have in cancer and heart disease. And so it primes us as a species to label people with mental illness as some people to be separated from or to be wary of, I think is the case, which is so untrue because the prevalence rates are so high. And many of us will have in our lifetime maybe just an episode of mental health problems, or maybe even have a lifetime of low-level depression, or have anxiety and really not realize that this is something that could be better for you if you understood that anxiety can be treated. So it's really a quandary for us because it's so prevalent, and yet people don't recognize that. They're starting to more. So we have seen change over time. But one of the reasons we haven't made that progress is while the prevalence is the same as heart disease and cancer, the research money that goes into this is about 1/10 of those areas.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And
oh
so,
my gosh.
If we had a mental health moonshot, the way that we had a cancer moonshot, we probably would have gotten a lot farther. But even the research is stigmatized. I mean, when I tell some people that I study mental health, they kind of back away just a little bit And they're like, oh, or, they think it's kind of weirdly interesting. But for me, it's really the heart of where a sociologist can be of help, because it really is a situation where this group in Utah did a study using AI and large language models, and they were predicting, what are the things associated with five major mental disorders. And they had, every kind of data you can think of, biological, genetic, blood work, social factors, background, etc. And in every one of those, they found that 3 to 5 characteristics could predict each mental illness, and they were all social factors.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I see. I don't think a lot of people really appreciate that, to be honest. And
Well, we're
um,
in a society where we want to believe everything's mechanical and
right,
biological, can be fixed with a pill.
right.
And while I think there are very effective medications for mental health problems,
Hmm.
again, we haven't had a really new drug in a while.
That's right. That's right. We had Richard DeMarchi on the podcast not long ago, and there's been amazing, obviously innovations that he's helped to pioneer in so many ways. But to
Absolutely.
your point, Bernice, I don't think we're going to see a Wegovy for mental health anytime soon.
Well, not with the, I think there have
Not
been
with
some
these funding
incredible
levels.
missteps as well. We had
Yeah,
a director of the NIH who, you know, got rid of all funding except for looking at, sort of biomarkers. Well, it turns out there really aren't any really good biomarkers for mental health. Uh, I mean, I'd be really excited to see somebody like Richard DeMarchi turn his idea about protein folding into mental health. Like we haven't unlocked it the way he unlocked, GLP-1, which is such an exciting thing. And for the longest time, obesity, it still is stigmatized. And, but now with GLP-1, it looks like, the stigma, which is usually associated with, sloth, laziness, overeating, right? Now we know that GLP-1 can correct people's metabolism, and hopefully that will decrease the stigma attached. But we have to be careful because there might now be a new stigma to people who don't choose to use it.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
of course,
Absolutely,
we
good point.
know that in America, we tend to think that people don't choose, but often they don't have access.
That's right. That's right. And I was curious too, what does your research tell us about how public attitudes toward mental health have actually changed over time? As you say, we have a long way to go, needless to say, but has there been some positive progress that you've been able to track?
Absolutely. We have good news and bad news. We started these studies in 1996. And at that point, things didn't look very good, to be honest, in terms of how people could recognize mental health problems, what they thought they were caused by. And in our now 24 years of studying this, we have found that Americans have become much more sophisticated about understanding mental health and its underlying biological, chemical, social roots. So that's very exciting. And we found that both by 2020 for adults disorders, and in our recent study, which we're still working on the numbers, but it looks like with a 20-year lag, Americans now have gotten there regarding child and adolescent disorders. Like they're better at recognizing them, they're better at understanding their biological roots and their social roots, and less likely to see this as a moral failing. So, yeah, that's really good. The problem is that those changes in knowledge and recognition have not translated into changes in stigma. The exclusion idea is still, or the idea that people are unwilling to interact with people that are described with these disorders. We don't even label them. We just, say, here's a person. Like, what do you think is going on with this person? And why do you think they have that problem? And then, for the child study we would say things like, would you, how willing are you to have this kid in your kid's class? What about in their sports team? What about be best friends with them? And one of the things we found in all of our studies, whether it's adults or kids or which disorder, the more intimate the setting, right? So the closer the contact, the more rejection, the more stigma, the more exclusion. And that's really unfortunate because we now know across all areas of health that connectedness really matters. Connectedness helps us be healthy. Uh, as long as there's not too much connectedness, because then it flips the other way. So it's sort of that middle ground of being accepted and having close connections is really important for all our health, and mental health is no different.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, that elusive middle ground can be a challenge, but I think we've seen that borne out in so many areas of science. Just that those connections, that social well-being is, I mean, from longevity, like you said, to mental health, it's just vital. Um, I know IU is famous for its work, on networks. Clearly, we have one of the leading sociology departments in the nation, frankly, if not the world. A major focus of your work is how social networks influence these mental health outcomes and the prevalence of, friends and family and communities and how they shape care. But I'm kind of curious. I'm sure as a part of that, there's still lots of misconceptions, right, about people and why they're seeking care, and even close family members who want to help but are maybe going about it in a way that maybe is well intentioned, right? But as you say, the science might not be bearing out. So I'm curious kind of what advice you have there.
Well, I think that one of the things that we have been looking at is how different people different groups that surround people, whether or not they can see mental illness, right? So, in the study of Indiana, in this person-to-person health interview study, which is an ongoing study of 3,000 people scientifically selected in the state of Indiana, we compared whether or not a state-of-the-art diagnostic tool said that the person had mental health problems, whether or not they thought they had mental health problems, and whether or not the people around them thought that they had mental health problems. And the interesting thing is that there's very few cases in which there's overlap, right? And so trying to understand, there are people that we found people who think that that the person has a mental health problem, but the diagnostic tool says they don't, and they don't think they do. And that's where we end up getting some coercive care and misusing the resources that we do have, which are pretty rare. So we don't really want to treat the worried well. Um, and so sort of getting people aligned in their understanding of a person's problems, I think is really one of the important things. And so it's not just about educating the people that might be suffering, but the people around them in terms of knowing when something's like a day-to-day problem and knowing when something is, really crossed over that threshold. And that threshold really is functionality, right? People can have depression and do very well, but it's when it starts to interfere with their ability to live and work and be a family member that people need help. And so, and the same thing with addiction. We know that there are many high functioning people with alcohol problems, right? Um, but that makes for a very unhappy person and a very unhappy life. And sooner or later, it can't be maintained. And so, dealing with those disorders, even among people who are highly functional, is good for them, good for their families, good for our society.
And just to drive the point home before we move on, if someone listening does want to support a loved one who may be struggling with some stigma or some mental health disorder that might be lurking beneath the surface, maybe not quite impacting on functionality, as you said, Bernice, what would be, do you think, just a useful first step that might be even counterintuitive, but is borne out by the science?
Yeah, I think that there are probably three things.
Very good.
First of all, we have now an emergency line for mental health problems. It's 988, and it's very effective. I've actually used it myself. I get calls. I am not a clinician. I cannot tell you whether or not you have a mental illness, but I can tell you to call 988, and it will start to guide you to the right places to do that. I think, another thing that we can do is that we can start thinking about talking to each other about it, or find someone who has had that problem and talk to them, because they're likely to have more information. And then I think there are also, if you're really sort of very modern person and the computer and you love all these websites, there are some very reputable websites, and particularly regarding stigma, as opposed to just mental illness. If you want to know about mental illness and its symptoms, go to Mayo Clinic, go to the National Institutes of Health website. But if you want to know about stigma, I would suggest that you go to Project Healthy Minds website in New York, which is targeted toward millennials. Or if you're looking at kids and adolescents, I would go to the Bring Change to Mind website and look at that. And all of these have information and also how to start the movement in a direction that you might want to do. So I think it depends on whether or not you're looking for medical advice or you're looking for the larger advice of how do you live with a mental health issue. Because 1 out of 4 or 5 of us during our lifetime is going to have an episode. And it's not easy to detect. So I've been doing this research now for a very long time. And after my husband died, I thought I was really functioning really well. I was keeping all the balls in the air, things where I'm still teaching my large classes. But what happened is that I realized when my knees blew out that I was going home after work and sitting in a chair kind of comatose. And it was only the physical problem that led me, who's been doing this research for like 4 decades, to say, hey, maybe I'm depressed. And, a lot of depressions are self-remitting. But even if they are self-remitting, because those are called adjustment disorders, which often, take care of themselves in 6 months, why would you suffer for 6 months? And so it's part of the normal fabric of life that you're going to have challenges that might throw you off kilter, and that there is help for. It doesn't mean that you are going to have a chronic mental illness or you're going to be severely mentally ill. Um, I think that's really important. I don't think enough resources go to people with serious and chronic mental illness. But I do think that we have a lot of solutions for people who are going through these life crises, and they wouldn't have to suffer so much.
Well, I would so appreciate you sharing that more personal story, Bernice, because I'm sure that's going to resonate with a lot of people. I mean, you might not
Who
realize it, you
knew,
know?
right?
Yeah,
Who
exactly.
knew? Because I
Exactly.
literally in my
Yeah.
office, because we are the Ursay Institute, and inside that is the Indiana Consortium for Mental Health Services Research. I will get one call every 2 weeks by a IU parent, by somebody in the community, and saying, I'm calling you. Where can I get help? And um, we're not the right people to call, but of course we can, because of the research that we've done and our connections in the community. We can tell them where to go, but the services are just not adequate. Again, like the treatment that people with cancer receive, people with heart conditions receive, versus people with mental health problems, it's just it's dismal. But there are shining lights, which is this is my favorite of all of these advances, is that psychiatry residency is now the hardest residency to get into. And up until the millennial generation, you couldn't fill those residencies. Nobody wanted to go into psychiatry because it was so stigmatized. But the millennials have changed the world in more ways than one. And one of the good ways they've changed it is that they acknowledge mental health and they are not afraid to talk about it. And I think that they really are going to change the world in this area. In our studies, we find that the younger people in our studies report the lowest levels of stigma. And we hope that that means that over time, we will have a slower change, but a real change in the levels of stigma in American society. But the other thing we know is that there's a conservatizing effect of age, and people just tend to get more stigmatizing as they get older. So, one of the reasons that it's so important for us to continue these studies, to be the only US national monitor of stigma, is because we need to know whether or not there's something that happens through the aging process, or if really this generation is going to change our whole society with regard to stigma. We can't answer that yet.
That is positive at least. So thank you for
Really is.
underscoring that
It
too.
really is. I
Um,
feel like
I
IU's really been at the forefront of this because we not only do research, but we also have, I think many people know that Glenn Close has worked with us to develop Bring Change to Mind. She called me when she was thinking about this. Needless to say, I was surprised and didn't really think it was her, but nonetheless, she was looking for a scientific advisor for a group that she wanted to start about 12 years ago. And I've been her scientific advisor since then. And, so they do high schools, right? And so they bring information to high schools, and it's peer to peer. So it's students talking to students. And we're in 500 high schools in the United States now. And I have to say, Indiana's a model state because our Department of Mental Health and Addiction, our Department of Education have paired together to support over 100 high schools in Indiana having a Bring Change to Mind peer-to-peer club. And then, at that point, I said to Glenn, hey, what about colleges, right? What do you mean? College is my jam. Why aren't we doing colleges? So we did a 4-year study here to create an evidence-based program. And it's been going now here for not quite 10 years, probably more like 8. And I feel that it's been very positive for us because I personally know that there are at least 5 psychiatrists who came to IU with a lot of stigma from their family backgrounds and now are practicing psychiatrists or they're in medical school in psychiatric residency. So I know that 5 people don't change the world, but if we could bring change to mind to every college and university, we could probably do a whole lot in changing the shortage of psychiatrists in the United States.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, those are some great examples of how
Yeah.
IU is, leading the charge nationally, and thanks to your work. And it reminds me of one of Eleanor Ostrom's quotes, which I know she was a mentor of yours.
Yes.
Little by little, bit by bit,
That's right.
family by family, community by community. So much good can be done on so many levels, and I think this is a great example of that.
Well, I think we're ready. I think we have done 8 years of work on this. We have a whole set of materials. It would be free to colleges and universities. We don't intend to monetize this, but it does require an infrastructure because there are other college programs and they're wonderful, right? So there's Active Minds and NAMI has a program. But when I came here, people would come to me, students would come to me and say, where's our Active Minds chapter? Where's our, NAMI chapter? Because they don't have an infrastructure, and I'm not talking about a massive infrastructure, but a basic infrastructure, they come and go with student interest. And so when you have a structure like we do, which is literally like a staff and a half, this has now been almost a decade that we have been operating, and under President Whitten, she helped us put it on every campus and fund it, but tragically, with the budget cuts, it will no longer be funded. Now, I can guarantee that the Bloomington campus You Bring Change to Mind program will continue as long as I'm alive. But I can't guarantee that for the other campuses. So, and I think that I have had many colleges and universities asking for the materials, and I would be happy to send them to them. But it's the evidence base depends on having this continued contact and having this kind of high touch that those other programs don't have. And also, we work with Active Minds. We think they're great. They have this one great event they do called Post-it, where kids write on Post-it notes, what they worry about. And they're anonymous, and then they're posted, and then there's an event that goes with it. And, it was fabulous. And to get their postcards cost us $500. And then if we wanted their speaker, it was like $10,000. And we were like, I think we could do this without that. So, but they maintain a large staff, but it's a large centralized staff where you can get their materials. Using social science, we have found that the principles on which we base You Bring Change to Mind comes up with a different structure that I think has been very successful in sustaining what's happening here. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm very excited about how Indiana has been on the forefront of the high school programs, and so successful that in Indiana they asked Bring Change to Mind to develop a middle school program. Now, of course, not every high school is welcoming, but I think that the people who are taking care of that at the high school level working very hard for the students. And again, it's not a lot of staff. In Indiana, I think it's 2 people can do this for the whole state because of their connection to the national infrastructure. And I think we do the same thing for colleges, but we'll just keep fighting for it. But, we'll do what we can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you will, Bernice. Just kind of
Well,
two
I'm
two
like you in
final.
that way, Scott. I don't take
Well,
no very easily. And
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah,
my mantra is, if you're not going to help, I can still help you. But if you're not going to help, get out of my way.
I hear you. No, and you've shown out what the power of that perspective can have throughout your long and storied career here. Just two final questions, if it's okay, before we have to conclude here. One is, we just had the Winter Olympics. We're looking ahead to the World Cup, and mental health conversations have obviously been really visible in athletics and public life. They always are, but especially now. Culture plays a role in reinforcing and reducing stigmas in that domain, but I know that's broadly an area at Ursay around socio-medical science and mental health that you've been really focusing on. And I was curious if you'd like to share any insights there.
I think it's very important because it's very important and it's very timely because it's not like these are the only people coming out with mental health issues. You had people like Patty Duke and other actors coming out in the 60s, but we hadn't reached the tipping point. And the tipping point has been created by the millennials. And so this is really, I think, a moment for us. But I don't think it's enough. It's not enough to have people with celebrity status come out, but it sure helps. And it helps in the following way. And it guides the work that we do, which is, if we have some incredibly famous psychiatrist from Harvard come to give a talk, the people who are going to come are the people who already care about the issue. The key to unraveling stigma is to get outside the choir, to get those people who think it's not relevant for them, that this is never going to happen to them, they don't know anybody with these issues, get them in the door. And that's, again, why the principles that underlie Bring Change to Mind, and You Bring Change to Mind in particular, takes a very different tact. And that's where these people who are celebrities speaking out matters, because we can use that in a way. So, for example, we have a thing called the elephant arc in You Bring Change to Mind. And that is, we have these 10-foot blow-up elephants, which attract students, first thing, right? The first elephant is purple, and that is what's your elephant in the room, right? And the week that Taylor Swift was finishing her concerts in Indy, we blew up that purple elephant, and the purple elephant had a friendship bracelet on, giant friendship bracelet that said, "I'm in my mental health era." That brought the kids in. They made friendship bracelets a la Taylor Swift, but they were mental health affirmative. We had 500 students come to that event.
Oh, no doubt.
So you
No doubt.
get them in the door. The second part is the green elephant. And the green
Yeah.
elephant is introducing them to the resources available for mental health.
Mm.
And that is where we do providing information about campus services, other services, these websites we've been talking about. Then the final giant elephant is a multicolor elephant. And the multicolor elephant is about how we need to think about community, right? That all different colors make a better community. And but to get them there, I mean, the elephants are great to bring them in, but there is always a learning thing that they have to participate in to get the swag, because they are into swag. And again, working off of popular culture helps us a lot. So the last thing, the purple elephant, we had was called Unboxing Stigma. And the box was a box that had a Labubu in it, right? Of which I had no idea what a Labubu was. And if you don't know, look it up. They're these ugly little trolls, and they're very hot right now. And again, we had over 300 students come to that event. And so the ARC over the semester really does the think about yourself, know that there's help, be part of a community of change. And so our student group right now, I cannot say how wonderful they are. They are planning things around Hunger Games coming out next fall with Glenn Close is going to be in it. They're doing a heated rivalry event, I think this Saturday. So those are the things that matter in terms of making sure you get to the kids who really are not thinking about this. And they're the ones who crash when they have a mental health problem because they have not thought about it. They don't think it's them. They think it's something else. So we're working at every level, also on workforce development. And so it's just the Ursay and the Ursay family and the Indianapolis Colts have been such a help for us. Their spirit, their willingness to come out of the shadows has just made a huge difference for us.
It's fantastic, Bernice. And I know, frankly, I think we just scratched the surface, and I'd love to continue this for some hours. But where, as a closing question, when we finally, live in a world where mental health illness is treated with the same dignity and urgency as any other health condition, what part of that legacy will have started, right here at IU, and frankly with yourself as you look back on your career, since I know I'm not breaking any news here that you'll be retiring, unfortunately, before too long.
Well, yes, I will be retiring, but that doesn't mean I'm leaving. I just think it's very important to make room for the young. And so that is why I'm retiring. But the new director, whoever she may be, has guaranteed that I get to keep my office. I still have research grants. I still am connected to the UBRIC Change to Mind program. And I will try to be working on development, bringing the community more into the support for these kinds of things, whether it's here at IU or in their communities. And so I think it's the right time for me to sort of move away. I already miss freshmen. I taught my last 200 kid intro class called Medicine in America last fall, and I already miss them, but there is a time when you have to know it's the right time. And we still have a lot of work to do, and I'm sure that the Ursay can carry on, but you're not rid of me yet.
That's right. And you've left, again, just such an amazing legacy at Ursay and otherwise. So just thank you, Bernice, for all you've done to, cast additional light on the science of stigma, on the importance of treating mental health, just like any other aspect of our health, and for all you do to enrich our community here in Bloomington, around the state and beyond. And thanks for being on the podcast.
And it is thanks to the IU community, and the people of the state of Indiana have been incredible. So we continue. If you want to help us, give us a call, and we'll see what we can do. Okay.
Thank you so much, Bernice.
Okay.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor and a pleasure. So please don't hesitate, guys. Reach out to the Ursay Institute, to Bernice Pesco-Salido in particular. And thank you for joining us today on this episode of the We Are IU podcast. See you next time.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of We Are IU. Your home for fascinating conversations with thought leaders, legends, and visionaries from the university we know and love. New episodes available monthly at myiu.org.